about life. Let's have a little conversation. Let's talk about life. We'll learn a little information. Let's talk about life. Let's talk about love.
Good morning. This is Beverly Harity broadcasting from beautiful St. Petersburg, Florida. It's a gorgeous day here. Very excited about this show. As you know, this is the second installment of my series on addictions, and I've got an amazing guest who's going to educate you, maybe more than you wish to be educated, but this is what this show is all about. The whole series is about educating the dependent drinker, the abusive drinker, the social drinker, and everything in between, casual use, informal, all the things, the wine guy who collects wine, and all the reasons people spin about why they use and why they use so much. And I want to start the show out by just giving a little bit of an education here. There's a very, very fine line. As a matter of fact, in all the years I've been in this field, which is almost over 30 now, about 35 years, nobody I've spoken to, nobody, expert, addict, user, nobody I've spoken to can pinpoint when that line gets crossed. And it's the line between alcohol abuse, any kind of abuse, substance abuse, and addiction. And the line is invisible, but trust me that it's there. The only way it can be really determined that it's there is once you've crossed the line, because then it becomes what we call cellular adaptation, meaning that you can abuse alcohol for 5 years, 10 years, some people abuse it for 15 years, but when they cross that line, there's evidence or proof or clinical proof that an addiction has taken place because cellular adaptation occurs. But nobody knows exactly when it occurs. So some people, they drink for a year and they completely addicted. Others for years and years and years. But we do know one thing, if you drink long enough and frequently enough, you'll cross that line and you will become an addict and dependent on whatever substance you're using. So my cautionary tale in telling you this is, don't take your casual drinking for granted. You have to pay attention. And it's not for today's show, but I think it's really important because my guest is I'm asking my guest today to talk about when she feels she passed that line. I mean, you kind of know it, but there's no clinical evidence unless you cross it. So I just want to put that out there in the beginning of the show so people can understand where we're kind of going, the direction we're going in. I also want to mention my wonderful sponsors whom I adore, UPS store at 2nd and 2nd South. And they're just terrific guys. And they have a full-service store, and you walk in and you can get anything. You can get mailboxes, you can get packages forwarded, held for you. You can buy greeting cards, packaging, whatever, ship anything, anywhere, at any time, and get your passport photo taken. It's a full-service UPS store, and I know most of you listening have been there, but they've offered to sponsor this show, and I'm thrilled, so I want to give them a nice, perky little sponsor saying. So, UPS 2nd and 2nd sponsors Let's Talk Life. Okay, I'm going to introduce my friend. She is a friend. We've become pals, not bosom buddies because we've just met a couple times, but we really, share the same vibe. And I like her level of education and awareness. And she's from New York. I think us big city girls all kind of resonate with each other. I'm from Chicago. So her name is Janet. and she is a recovering addict and an author. And we're going to talk all about that, but I want to start the show by just asking Janet this open-ended question, or statement, make the statement rather, and it's, Janet, tell me about your life.
Oh, wow. Well, I just want to also plug UPS Second. I love them. I just recently went in to get something laminated. Isn't that great? I mean, you know, who would think? But there they were, and they readily did it. So it was great. Anyway, so about my life, it has a lot to do with alcoholism, drug addiction, and then recovery. I think the arc of it is all about from the minute I picked up a drink, excuse me, on New Year's Eve when I was 13 until I was 33. There was 20 harrowing years, which I write about in my book. And then recovery, which was in a way equally dramatic because I went back to school. I got 2 degrees. All of this could not have been accomplished when I was drinking because I was a low bottom kind of dysfunctional kind of alcoholic. But as soon as I got sober, what emerged for me was all of this ambition and hopes and dreams, which had been completely stifled because I was literally in the streets of New York.
Okay, well, let's go back though, because what I particularly want my listeners to understand is where so many of them that I happen to know are on the cusp of addiction. Mm-hmm. And I'd just like you to talk about, you're 13. I had my first drink when I was 12, so I understand that. Mm-hmm. And I understand I've had many clients, frankly, that have immediately become addicted. Mm-hmm. And that goes to, and I'm going to pitch a book right now. It's a book called Under the Influence by Milam and Ketchum, and it's all research about addiction. Mm-hmm. And it's thanks to the Great Society, ex-President Johnson, and the Great Society. He funded a lot of research in addiction, and this book is a result of all that research. So it's very helpful to know. But when I worked with my clients, I always was interested in what I call the setup. What happened in your life? It's not that you took a drink at 13. There was a vulnerability somewhere in your life. And could you share?
Sure. I happen to subscribe to the school that it is inherited as well as nurtured. It's both nature and nurture. In my case, my father, God bless him, he sobered up when I was 8, but he was a real binge drunk, serious alcoholic. And I think there was some what they call functional alcoholism on my mother's side of the family, because they were highly functional. But my father drank, I drank the way my father drank, which is to say, I believe that from the moment I picked up alcohol, that there was a chemical change that doesn't happen to purely social drinkers.
I understand that completely, and I agree with you.
Yeah.
And these fine distinctions it's good to talk about them because there's so many high-functioning alcoholics. Mm-hmm. So when you even allude to their drinking as a problem, mm-hmm. they're outraged because they're so high-functioning. They're the most difficult people to intervene on, but usually life will intervene. Life will intervene.
They say for the functional alcoholic, it just takes all roads lead to.
Right.
But it takes them longer.
Much longer.
They have, they are functioning. So I think you have to be. I also got sober many, many years ago, in 1981. So I am old school in a lot of different ways, and I understand that, the more we know and the more we learn, the more different ways there are to approach this. But it used to be commonly believed that you had to bottom out, which means nowadays we don't think anymore that you have to take it all the way to the bottom. But in the old days, they did believe that because they thought you had to be so highly motivated that the only way that you would ever give up alcohol is if you had lost everything.
Well, some of the high functioning alcoholics had the bottom. They'd never. That was the intervention. There was no intervention. The bottom was,
the bottom is the thing that works.
That worked
the
for
best.
them.
Yeah. And usually people will sacrifice, and this is kind of tragic, but they will give up their families before when their livelihood is threatened, when their careers are threatened by alcohol. That seems to be the interventions, from what I understand, that occur on the job are more successful than family interventions, sadly.
No.
But I have read that, and that makes sense to me.
It does make sense because by the time the family intervenes, they're all crazy too.
Yeah.
Because over long periods of time, trying to adapt and have a good fit with your partner who, and your significant other, you start making compromises in your moral world, and you do things you wouldn't ordinarily do. You behave differently, and plus they do a hell of a good job telling you you're crazy.
Yeah,
and you start to believe that. You start to wonder about your own sanity.
Yeah.
So,
that's right.
Yeah, so
that goes with a lot of gaslighting, as they call it. Yeah.
So we've got somebody here, listeners, that is incredibly experienced, that understands addiction and recovery. So her words of wisdom, I want you to pay attention to them. Okay? All right.
All based on experience.
Experience, the best teacher in the world.
Yeah, right. But as far as crossing the line, I think that for me, it was almost immediately.
Okay.
By the time I was 19, I couldn't get drunk every night when I was first in college because I didn't have a car. So part of my mission at that time was to rally people who did have cars to take me across the border to New York, where the drinking age at that time was 18. So that was, part of my quest.
All right,
going to the neighboring boys' college.
Okay. So let's talk about something that's also. Yeah. These are lessons. I think we're two teachers at this point. Mm-hmm. How everybody in your world serves you to the end of drinking and using. That they're not friends. They're seen as how you can. They're friends, but you know what I mean. They're chosen.
I have some very good friends from those days.
Yeah.
So I didn't experience it quite like that because I think partly because I came of age in that wonderful. It was an anomalous time, the hippie thing, and there really was a lot of camaraderie and genuine, goodwill, even in the streets. And there was a kind of almost innocence about it that you wouldn't find today. And I think that's because we all, in some sense, were a little utopian. We thought we were going to, bust out of the system and change the world.
Well, that's what the 70s were about.
Yeah, the 60s and the 70s.
Yeah.
So, and I got sober in 81. So, that was also fueling it. Everybody, it seemed to me, in my world, were alcoholics, drug addicts, and it was all fine. There didn't seem to be any stigma because as far as the eye could see, that's what all the kids were doing. We were all doing drugs in one form or another, and my particular crowd, we were drinking as well, and a lot. So I didn't feel, there wasn't much conflict in the sense of I was trying to hang on to a legitimate career or a family or anything, that the pain of that is, honestly, it's something I learned about later on after I got sober, that people really, it's a terrible kind of suffering when you have a job that you love and you want to do well, and meanwhile you've got the bottle in the drawer, and you're trying to sneak it and keep it under control. I didn't have any constraints like that. So in a way, it was it wasn't until the very end, when I was bottoming out, that it really got painful.
Can we talk a little bit about privilege?
Yeah.
Because I think one of the things that I want my listeners to understand is that you came from a privileged background.
True, but there was no money left. So I didn't have any money at all.
But
because my grandfather was the one who my grandparents, he was a newspaper publisher, but a small one, a very righteous sort of fighting cock liberal. He was an advisor to Roosevelt. He was a wonderful man. Didn't really care about money, unfortunately, for me. And then he had to sell his papers. When he did, he made millions, which in those days was a lot of money. It's in the late 40s.
Why did he have to sell his papers?
Because he was a true liberal, very pro-union. He gave the Newspaper Guild their first contract. And the communists, which was a strong party at the time, hated him because liberals are the worst obstacle. Roosevelt used to say, I saved democracy. I saved America because it would have become communist if I hadn't stepped in and did what I did. So the communists saw the New Deal as the biggest obstacle to communism and socialism. And so it's really very sad and touching. He refused to have a quota or to examine somebody's political beliefs in the unions of his papers. He had 3 at the time. And they saw this as an opportunity. They infiltrated his papers, and then they struck. And he didn't have deep pockets at all. He sort of always was.
Okay.
So when they struck, he immediately granted them all of their demands. And they didn't end the strike because they wanted to destroy him. So finally, he recognized that he would have to sell. He just didn't have the resources to keep going. So that's what he did.
Oh, that's a tragic story.
It is.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay. Was there a haunting in the family about that?
Oh, yeah. I think he was really bitter. But he also understood. I think it's a funny thing. At the end of his book, which is a wonderful book, Memoirs of a Maverick Publisher, his main paper was the Philadelphia Record. And he really changed hearts and minds. He wrote the editorial every day. And another paper was the Camden Courier at a time when Camden, New Jersey was a thriving factory town.
Industrial, yeah.
It had Campbell's Soup, it had this one and that one, it had a lot of big business. And the other paper briefly was the New York Post, which he rescued. But then he actually gave it to the next owner, whose name was Dorothy Schiff, because she was indeed very rich. She had very deep pockets. And it was to keep the paper going, because it's the oldest, I think it might be the oldest tabloid.
So that was your grandfather's paper?
Yeah, for a while.
Wow. That's big.
Yeah, he was a serious, he was, as I said. I have all the copies of letters that from Roosevelt to him. I mean, a stack. He was one of his...
Well, how cool is that?
Yeah, main advisors. But he understood at the end that, you see, he had always been the most benevolent of bosses, and you would want for nothing. If you were sick, it was better than Aflac. I mean, he was that kind of guy. But then at the end, he understood that what they were demanding was an autonomy, that no matter how generous he was, that unless you have your own power and you're self-determining, you're still completely dependent on the largesse of your employer. Right. And I think he began to understand at the very end of his career and his life the shortcomings, the inherent serious fatal flaw that is inherent in capitalism. He finally got that. And
did that make a difference for him?
Well, it's interesting because he mentions it at the end of his book, and it's tremendously, for me, and enlightening, a sort of jumping off point for me, where he understands what they're after. Because honestly, he was ridiculously righteous and caring employer.
Well, the ultimate freedom is everybody's dream.
It's not just so much freedom as I would have to say power. In other words, people need to be self-determining. And that he did not get until the very end, because in capitalism, of course, that's not possible if you're employed.
Okay.
So that was something that he. So in other words, it isn't just having a strong union; it's having an autonomous union, so that you're actually sharing the fruits of your labor in a way that can't be determined by the employer. So that means socialism, and I think he began to understand that in a very real way. But anyway, so there he was, and he and my grandmother, I now understand, they lived so high off the hog, and so I grew up surrounded by incredible luxury. 1% it would be now. They lived in a penthouse on Fifth Avenue, duplex, the whole roof looking out over the park. And they had a gorgeous house in Palm
And you
Beach.
lived there?
No, I didn't. But they bought an apartment. My grandfather bought an apartment for my mother and me on Park Avenue.
So
Gorgeous,
where was
huge
Dad
apartment.
then?
So Dad was up in Dobbs Ferry. He was a newspaper man too. He had sobered up. They were divorced.
Okay.
And he married again.
Okay.
And I would see him occasionally. He would put me on a horse. We'd go riding. He was a big equestrian. But he, my Yankee father, he didn't have any money, and he didn't contribute a lot to my upbringing, other than he was there. There was no alienation, but he wasn't very involved.
Okay. So you have this childhood that has a lot of drama. There's a lot of drama in your story, and a lot of conflict, and a lot of coming to terms with reality, so to speak. A parental divorce, a binge drinking dad, a high functioning mom that drinks. And here you are, you're 13, and you take that first drink. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And it was at my grandparents' New Year's Eve party. Champagne.
Okay, now we're going to take a commercial break, and we're going to start with that champagne New Year's Eve party, okay?
Yep. Oh, sorry.
Let's talk about life. Let's have a little conversation. Let's talk about life. Let me learn a little information. Let's talk about life. And let's talk about love.
Yes, let's talk about life, and let's talk about love, and let's talk about UPS and Second, a full-service store, UPS store with everything you could possibly need to go from point A to B. You can have your passport photos taken there. So I want to put a plug in for UPS, the sponsors of Let's Talk Life at Second St. Pete. And now we're going to talk about that little girl, 13 years old, privileged, but highly, stressful childhood, lots of drama going on, living on Penthouse and Park Avenue, and she's 13 years old, and it's New Year's Eve. So here we go.
Okay. Yes, so small correction. We didn't live in the penthouse. My grandparents did. But we had a huge rambling apartment on Park Avenue, my mother and I.
Okay.
All right, so now it's New Year's Eve. It's my grandparents' open house. Christmas Eve. That's what it was, Christmas Eve. They used to do, even though they were Jewish, they had huge Christmas Eve parties every year with a huge tree. Don't ask, okay? But there I was, and the champagne was probably very good.
I'm assuming at that level of consumption.
I had 2 glasses, and I just thought, this is it. I mean, I just remember falling head over heels in love with alcohol. I actually threw up in the courtyard of my, on the way home, courtyard of my Park Avenue apartment.
Did you throw up because of the taste or because of the feeling?
No,
the
I
effect?
love the taste. I threw up because I was 13, a little child.
No, I didn't mean about throwing up. I meant when you say you fell in love.
Oh,
was it that?
it was the effect.
The effect. Okay.
I mean, I liked the taste too, actually, but the effect.
What was the effect?
The effect was I got high right away on two glass because I was a little girl and they were good size.
I understand, but I'm going to try to tease out a little bit of more detail.
Yeah.
You got high.
Yeah.
You felt what? Euphoric? Is euphoric?
I felt euphoric, and I also would imagine that the anxiety that I live with, without me being consciously aware of it, was lifted. And the relief that comes, especially I don't know about social drinkers, I couldn't speak for them, but for us alcoholics, the relief, it's almost a feeling of relief that comes when you pick up that first, oh my God, I found out what's missing.
Good. I'm glad you put it that way, and I think you put it beautifully, by the way.
Yeah. So that was the beginning.
Okay.
And then when I threw up, it didn't bother me. That was a small price to pay. Whereas I think, perhaps for non-alcoholics, throwing up is like some kind of a warning sign. Oh, you better be careful because this stuff makes you sick. In my case, it was so what.
Okay. Well, were you alone when you threw up?
No, my mother and I were coming home. We'd probably taken a cab home. Got out of the cab. Maybe I got a little car sick, and then threw up in the beautiful courtyard of the Park Avenue.
So what did she say when you threw up?
Oh, she was very philosophical about all of it.
Everything. Okay, so we have the intellectual approach to an addiction.
Yeah.
I love the intellectual addicts. I just love them. They're so creative, aren't they?
Well, and also she had read books, been to a few Al-Anon meetings. She knew how to detach, supposedly. She's very philosophical, and she wasn't worried yet because these were only my first 2 drinks, and I was 13. Mm-hmm. So she was probably mildly amused at that point.
Okay.
She wasn't worried yet.
Okay.
That came later. Yeah.
Talk about that.
So, as I was saying, I wasn't yet a daily drunk in college when I was 18.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
When you said that came later.
Yeah.
How much later did she start to worry?
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Oh, okay.
But then after my college kicked me out and I came to New York, I quickly became a daily drunk by the time I was 19. And
so it came 6 years later.
Yeah. From the time, by the time I was 19, I was a daily drunk.
Is that when she started to worry?
I think she started to worry a little later on than that. Because I wasn't living with her anymore. I moved out pretty fast. And
where did you go in?
I got my own apartment. I had a job and all of that. And I actually very quickly moved in with my then boyfriend.
Okay.
By the time I was 19, somewhere in there. We started living together. So, and funnily enough, just down the street from my mother and his mother, we all lived on the same block. It's very weird. Boy next door kind of thing.
Oh, again, there's a lot of families that cluster.
Yeah, this was a very strange kind of clustering thing. And his brother lived with us in the spare bedroom too. So it was
Yeah.
So I hadn't yet moved very far away in any way, emotionally or anyway. Even though I was 19 and living with a man and all that. But it was...
How old did you feel?
Well, I tell you, for me, alcohol was beginning to be a problem because there were terrible hangovers. I was working and I had to get up and go to work and it was painful. So it was already starting to take a physical toll.
I hear that. But I want to go back a little bit just because this is the danger zone we're talking about here. How old did you feel emotionally? Did you still need... There's a lot of theories about alcohol and drugs halting developmental.
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
Of that, I am convinced.
Okay.
Certainly was the case for me.
Okay.
Certainly was. the really one of the, I think, most destructive aspects of the disease of alcoholism is that it arrests growth. Absolutely where you stand, from the time that you're drinking alcoholically to the time you stop. There cannot be any emotional growth. There just can't be.
And most other kinds of growth, too.
Right.
Yeah.
I know, No, it's such a destructive disease, I have to say, or at least it was for me. And there may be people who, my grandfather himself may have been a functional alcoholic. I think he might have been, very much so. But he was functional. So we can't say in his case that it was a problem, because we don't have much evidence of it interfering, making his life unmanageable. Whereas in my case, my life was quickly unmanageable. So I even think the AMA has bifurcated their diagnoses of their definition of alcohol, saying there's two different kinds, the functional and the dysfunctional.
It's about time they got on the way.
Yeah.
It's about time they got a clue.
Yeah.
When I was teaching at Cook County Hospital, I was teaching doctors who, at that previous to my coming into the teaching theater with all my material and everything, they had a page and a half of training on alcoholism.
God.
This is the largest training hospital in the world.
Yeah.
And nobody knew anything about alcoholism. And the irony is 97% of the patients there had alcoholic chemical problems. It was crazy that they were so ignorant. I was shocked that they were so ignorant.
Yeah.
And so they finally got a clue.
Yeah, exactly.
Differential diagnosis.
Yeah,
huh?
differential diagnosis, exactly. That's the right term for it. And I'm the dysfunctional kind, just for the record. So I can speak, though, from years of experience with alcoholics, with fellow alcoholics, I can speak a little bit to the functional kind. I feel for them. Like I said, people who have jobs and careers and loved ones and all this.
Responsibilities,
lives that they want to hold on to. It's a terribly painful thing when it's constantly under threat by your, encroaching disease.
Talk about stress.
And talk about
ulcers and talk about all kinds of medical complications other than the addiction.
Yeah.
It's a nightmare.
And it's good to remember that the only reason these people in particular do not give up alcohol is because they're alcoholic. I mean, seriously, like if they weren't, they would just say, oh, this isn't good for me. I don't think I'm allergic to this. Or, I see where this is making my life unmanageable. So I think I'll have to give it up. No.
Well, even when they go, in my experience, people, they go and they haven't, they have esophageal varices. They have all these complications, physical complications.
Right.
The doctor tells them they're going to die.
And they still don't. No, you can't scare a drunk, they say. You can't scare a drunk.
No, you can't.
Yeah. So it's kind of a miracle that any of us ever get sober, actually.
Well, that's I think, what Carl Jung would talk about, the transformational experience, the alchemical experience, and the alchemy of sobriety. Exactly. I think that's would be a fascinating subject, because here we are, cellular adaptation.
Yep.
And then you have a miracle of alchemical transformation.
Exactly. And as you know, he called it spiritus versus spiritum. And so really, he said that alcoholics are on a primitive spiritual quest, in fact.
He believed that.
He believed that, but just, we were using the wrong tools. And that the only solution really is, and not to get too woo-woo here, but it's, in my experience, the only solution is spiritual.
Well, you have to have that transformation.
You have to have that transformation.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because it could be perceived as woo-woo, but I think the bottom line is the dependency is so incredibly powerful that it would need something equally powerful to transcend it.
That's right.
And what is equally powerful? Well, it's you're not going to take an anti-alcohol pill. That doesn't work.
No.
You're not going to take all these different medications. Those don't work. The only thing that's more powerful is a spiritual transformation.
Exactly.
But how do you get there? And where are your wake-up calls? And for each person, it's very, very different. So where will use some of your wake-up calls?
Well, I knew enough about alcoholism. My father was sober. He was not in AA, but my stepmother was in AA. So I got some of that through osmosis, maybe. And my mother had been to Al-Anon meetings, etc. So I knew you had to bottom out. So that became my MO. I was going to bottom out. Meanwhile, I was scraping along the bottom for years. At any point, I was well qualified to go into AA. And I don't want to talk too much about the program because I believe in anonymity, and I also believe in the concept of one day at a time. That's what I subscribe to. That okay. I have never taken a pledge. I have no intention of staying sober beyond today. I couldn't do it because I'm defiant by nature. That's the whoop and wharf of me. And if I thought that I who am over 21 and have as much right as anybody to go into a liquor store and buy a bottle.
You sound like one of those union guys for your grandfather.
Yeah. I mean, I make, it's almost an existential choice. Now, I don't consciously, after almost 37 years, make that choice every day, obviously, but it's there. It's the way, and it's more than just lip service.
Oh, I know from talking to you, it's much more than that. It's your passion and mission.
It is one day at a time for me, because I know I can stay sober today. I have no problem doing that usually. I mean, there's been a few bumps on the road, but for the most part, it's been painless.
Have you ever relapsed?
No, not since my sobriety. I relapsed when I was trying to get sober. Of course, I did what they call slip and slide.
Yeah, because relapse is very common.
Relapse is very common, and it's something that a lot of people do, and if they have a program as I do, then the chances are that, I mean, not great but good, that they will get back to their sobriety. Okay. But in my case, once I finally put that drink down, so far, I mean, as of today, I haven't picked up.
Okay, let's move along to something I think is very important.
Yeah.
Very important.
Yeah.
How did you get sober?
Okay, so the bottom was pretty horrible, and I was about to be put out into the street. I was going to get evicted. My mother refused to enable me, so there was no place to go.
Can we talk about enabling for a minute?
Yeah. When
you say that term, I know what it means.
Yeah.
But in other words, in the way you're describing it, she wouldn't rescue you from you.
She was tired of doing that because she'd been doing that for years.
Okay.
And she finally just said, no. Well, she had got me she put me into Bellevue, actually. And that's a hair-raising story. In those days, you had to get 3 doctors to commit. And she raised the 3 doctors, and they all came to the apartment. And I came up there because, once again, I had been beat up, I was broke, or whatever it was, and I went there looking for succor, for a refuge, and usually she wouldn't let me in, and that day she did, and I should have been suspicious. And there was 3 doctors waiting in the wings, and or she called them, and they very quickly came. And I fought them off physically. But I kind of knew that the gig was up. And
were you ever on the street?
I was, except I did have a roof over my head. So, okay. But I was just shy of being homeless, but I was really far down and out. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
In fact, when I first got sober, I went on welfare for a while, just to help me get on my feet. Yeah. So,
did you have a series of boyfriends?
I certainly did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or drinking buddies, we call them.
No, well, they were. Yeah. I mean, I was always living with someone. I got married in there at some point.
Okay.
Don't even ask. But
I won't.
Yeah.
Maybe another interview.
There was always a boyfriend.
Okay.
And there was always a lot of boyfriends too.
Okay.
One in many.
One in many, yeah. Well, that's the street. That's how
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
For women. Yeah.
Well, except that I must say, I mean, one of the things that I like to talk about when I talk about addiction, and I think it's very important, and in this case, I feel like I'm building a bridge to the active alcoholic and addict. So in a way, I have to bypass people who care and who are, part of the helping and recovery community. I have to kind of sort of like zoom past you, because I don't forget. It's part of the reason I wrote this book. It's very important to remember that getting high, and for years getting drunk, this can go on for years, is really, really fun. It's why people do it. And I have not forgotten that. It was joyous, and especially, oh my God, I mean, I took some, speed trips where, honestly, I went to other dimensions. Okay, so I only mention that because so often, I mean, of course, the outcome is lethal. And I never want it to be anything other than a cautionary tale, because where it leads could even be death. And you've seen Wet Brain, I know, a lot. And
I've seen
consequences are dire. Physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, dire. But the reason that we addicts do it, and I think this is sometimes so often forgotten, that what happens is when the addict doesn't hear their experience in any way reflected in the discussion, they'll just say, "Oh well, the hell with it." You really get so high. And I heard Bill Moyers talk about this once in a way that has stayed with me forever. His son was, I think, a speed freak, as was I, eventually.
Okay,
methamphetamine, crystal meth, along with alcohol, of course. His son was either a heavy-duty cocaine addict, or possibly a speed freak as well. And he said the best that he could understand is that for someone like him, he was the equivalent of the father, Bill Moyers, was the equivalent of an orchardist. That those of us who have embraced sobriety, we are happy for the joys, quotidian joys that accumulate, that nobody can take away from you. That, the aggregate of that is a joyful, full life. It's full of accomplishments you can feel proud of, friendships and loved ones that, all kinds of wonderful things. But the addict, somebody who's, let's say, shooting a speedball, we used to call it, the old, cocaine and heroin together, whatever.
Yeah.
Soaring, you're getting all of that pleasure in a matter of minutes. Or in my case, my best highs were, these speed things where you would level off at like 1,000 feet above the ground and stay that way for days. But in other words, it's almost like the pleasure is concentrated and distilled in a way that it's compounded, that pleasure. But then, of course, when you come off the drug, it's all taken away from you. You're completely robbed of that, and you have no resources, no inner resources left. Now your body's used to that fuel, whether it's alcohol or drugs.
I think what you're describing is like the empty vessel. It's that transformative nirvana.
Yeah,
but it has no foundation.
It has no foundation. It's fleeting, and all you have to do is get off that drug, and it is going to be taken away from you, and that's why it's so hard to recover.
Some people believe, and I think I do too. After working all these years, is that when you start young, it's not there to begin with.
Right.
You haven't built
That's
solid foundation
that's
of
right.
Personal growth, accomplishment, all that.
Exactly.
You never get a chance to do that. The drug interferes with that, and the next thing you know, you are an empty vessel. There's nothing to fall back on.
That's right. It's a very good description of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, of course, nobody wants to stay in that abyss.
Right.
You know.
In that abyss, exactly.
I understand that completely.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how did you get sober?
So my problem was that I was psychotic half the time. I was destitute. I was constantly hooking up with my boyfriends were all beating me up. I couldn't hold a job. It was just a really and truly miserable existence. So I was in yet another, drying out detox. And this one was a pretty fancy one. And I got an outpatient counselor. And she was wonderful. Her name was Helen Eustace. And she was actually an Edgar Allan Poe award-winning mystery writer. Her books have been made into movies. And then as a second career, she became an alcoholism counselor. But she had that kind of background. And I couldn't put two sentences together. I was really, a mess. But I started to go to see her regularly. And there was something about her quiet intelligence. And I would come to her with all of these acute crises. My boyfriend beat me up. I lost my job. They were going to evict me, whatever it was. And she would just say, in response to that, she would take out a meeting book and she would circle one of the meetings in it and she would say, go to that meeting. And I said, but you don't understand. I've got real problems. What's with this? Go to the, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I always say it's like, Annie Sullivan and Helen Keller. It was just over and over and over, water. And then finally one day it clicked. Oh, in other words, there's actually a connection between my alcoholism and the wreck of my life. Like, there's some correlation there. I finally dawned on me. So I did start to go to meetings, and I couldn't stay sober in the beginning, but I would keep going back to my credit. I didn't go to a rehab because in those days they weren't as ubiquitous as they are now. I could have benefited from that, but I started to go to meetings. And
did you find that each meeting has its own culture?
Oh yeah, that's so true. In New York, there's so many. Of course, you can quickly find your own.
In Chicago too.
Yeah.
But I would find that I would be referring my clients to certain meetings because it was going to be a good fit for them.
Yeah. Oh, that's true.
And you
have to look for the right.
You don't see that in St. Pete. You don't. It's a big job finding a decent. It's a huge job, actually.
Yeah, to find one that's right for you.
Right.
There's a lot of decent meetings, but you want to be with people that you want to be with. You want to be with people that you
can relate to.
That you can relate to, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so here you are, and this counselor is steering you to AA.
Yeah.
And you started to go.
Yeah.
Because I know statistically, everyone, that only 7% of people get sober in a professional treatment facility. The other 93% get sober usually through AA or some type of self-help.
I think so far it's the only form of recovery. It's a program of attraction, not promotion. So I'm not here to promote it, but it is the only way to get sober as far as I know so far. There's been many other ways tried and none of them have worked. And this one works, not all the time, but more than any other, more than any other way. And it's also a wonderful way of life. I mean, I have to say, it's just great.
It is. You have your tribe all the time.
Exactly. And
no matter where you are, you find your tribe.
Anywhere in the world, and you're taken right into the heart of that community, wherever it is. You're never just, a tourist on the outside looking in. You go to a meeting, the next thing you know, you're going to dinner with the locals, or you're doing this or that. You're right in the bosom of whatever that place is. So it's great. Yeah.
The great equalizer.
Yeah.
So is that when you decided you're never going to look back? Was that your commitment then?
No, I've never made that commitment. As I said earlier, I never will. For me, that's just, and I believe that when I've had, let
me reframe my question.
Yeah.
Because I understand what you were saying earlier.
Yeah.
I did. Have you had a drink since then?
No, not since May 20th of 1981.
Okay.
Okay. That doesn't mean that I won't have a drink. I'm not one of those. There's a lot of people say, oh, that's not an option for me. Oh, it's an option for me.
Okay.
It's just one bent elbow away. It could be tomorrow. It could be next week. I hope it's never, because I'm really loving this life, and I will go to great lengths to protect my sobriety. And
It's beautifully put.
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah.
It's beautifully put.
Yeah.
And we need to come to an end. But I did want to talk to you about your book.
Okay.
I didn't bring it up in the beginning because this, I wanted you to show up as who you are.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to talk to the author of this book. And tell us about your book. What's the name?
The name of the book is Blue Money.
Blue Money.
Right.
It's from a lyric, isn't it?
Well, no, it's really it's an expression that means like black market money or
Illegal, something illegal.
Yeah.
Something illegal. Okay.
Yeah, and like blue laws or that kind of thing. And Van Morrison did write a song called Blue Money, which is a wonderful song, and he actually gave me permission to use a verse of it in the flyleaf of my book. It's the epigraph of my book, is a verse of his song, and he very generously gave that. And but anyway, it is about. It takes place from 1971 to 1977, because it's an autobiographical novel. It's a mostly true memoir, but the timelines aren't exactly accurate.
Okay.
But what it's about is the height of my addiction. At the end of the book, I don't want to give too much away, but I survive. I get sober. But
how do people find your book?
Well, it's available on Amazon.
Okay.
And it's at Haslam's.
It is?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. And so those are the two places around here that it's available.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Have you done any author readings in St. Pete?
I haven't done in St. Pete. I've done in many other cities, and culminating in the Miami Book Fair back in mid-November, which is a big honor. I've done other interviews. And
would you like me to get you an author reading here in St. Pete?
I would love it.
You got it. I'm getting you an author interview in
Great.
St. Pete.
Terrific.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll talk after the show.
I love giving readings. I do.
Yeah. It would be great. I would.
Yeah.
I'm sure it'd be incredibly interesting, and I know just the perfect place for you. Once again, it's got to be what I call a goodness of fit in life,
Right.
And everything is about a goodness of fit.
Yeah.
And that's a Margaret Mahler expression about an infant and a mother. And what she proved in her research was that not every infant and mother have what is called a goodness of fit, personality-wise.
Right.
So bear that in mind in life, If it can't happen between a mother and an infant, then don't be shocked if it doesn't happen in your life, because it's a struggle to find a goodness of fit.
Oh, I love that.
You've been an amazing guest.
Thank you.
And
you've been an amazing host.
Well,
I must say.
Thank you. The book is called Blue Money. And what I'm going to do is make a commitment to Janet about the book reading, and I will put it on the air. I don't know if I'll put it on the air. Better, I'll put it on my Facebook pages about, the radio, Let's Talk Life Facebook page, and then my personal page. And don't worry, the word will get out quickly. And you've been an amazing guest. I would love to have you back. There's so many elements of what you share that I want to go into, but we're out of time. But thank you. Thank you for being so candid and forward and honest. And, this is the heart and soul. You're sort of the embodiment of the program. Be out there, show up and be out there and do those kinds of things. And I hope that this show, my wish is that this show will make a difference to all you marginal, abusive alcoholics out there whom I dearly love, but really, really have to really watch that slip and slide into cellular adaptation, and then you're effed, you're effed. And you don't want to be effed in this world. So, but I also hear the fun aspects of, listen, I drank a lot in my day. I tried to keep up with my husband, and that's how I knew I was not an alcoholic. I mean, I couldn't. I tried, and
Yeah.
I just couldn't keep up
Didn't
with
have
it.
the calling.
I
Right.
didn't. I wasn't called.
Yeah.
I was called to Al-Anon and to call to service. That's
Yes.
what I was called to.
Yes. Wonderful.
But it did ruin my marriage, and I think it actually cast a huge shadow on my family system that is still there to some degree. So I feel very, very strongly about the negative effects and effects people don't even know. I mean, they're so unconscious at that point. They don't.
right.
They're clueless. But anyway, thank you, Janet. The book is Blue Money. It's on Amazon and Haslam's. And go get yourself a copy. You're going to be terribly impressed. And we'll talk about a book reading, and I'll get the word out to you. Thanks for listening. This is Let's Talk Life. And we're going to play Where Is He? Where Is He? Where Is He? Neil, here you are.